My name is Emily Neufeld, and I am the artist here in the Richmond Art Gallery. The show is called Prairie Invasions, a Lullaby, and it's mainly a show about made in domestic spaces across the Canadian prairies. So for this project, it's a little bit of a homecoming for me because I grew up on the prairies and I grew up exploring abandoned farmhouses across the prairies. Even when I was a child, there was lots of these houses just left in the middle of farmers' fields, and I would go into them and look around, look in the cupboards, look in the basements, and spend a lot of time wondering who lived there and where they went and why they would leave things behind. And then when I moved to Vancouver for art school, I switched to urban homes here in the Lower Mainland. But I always was kind of calling back to these prairie houses and thinking about them. So I was very happy to get a grant to be able to go back to the prairies and do similar work in these farmhouses. So when I get to a house, I don't bring any materials with me. All that I bring are tools and my camera. So I show up and I sort of look around for the thing that kind of makes that space special, or the thing that kind of like speaks to me in some way, where I start to build like a narrative of who lived here and when. And I know it's like a fictional narrative, but I start to build these narratives and I look to kind of amplify sort of these narratives that I'm forming in my mind. And then I use just like tools and what I find on site to sort of amplify that, or create interventions that sort of speak to some of the issues I'm thinking about, like land use or farming. And then I photograph these sculptures and turn them back into photographic sculptures to show in the gallery. So it's like quite a layered process of sculpting, photographing, and then re-sculpting with the photographs, kind of a thing, and using materials that I harvest from the sites, as well as building materials and plants and soil kind of from those locations. For this house here, there was a hole in the ceiling where rain was getting through, so wherever rain had come through the roof, there was moss growing on the bedstead here and then on the floor. And so I wanted to exaggerate that sort of like a little bit of life taking hold by cutting sod out of the farmyard and carrying it up the stairs and sodding, and even brought up some small poplar trees and sodding the second floor wherever there was moss, which is also like a little bit of a nod to the future when this house will collapse and the sod will be back at ground level. For this house, we came in and there was this black and pink wallpaper on the wall. The black is actually the backing of the wallpaper that was there, and the pink is the plaster underneath. But you could see in a few spots where there was floral wallpaper had been up on the wall, and you could sort of see these big patterns of these large peonies and roses in these bouquets that kind of made this wallpaper pattern. So I decided to copy the location of the floral bouquets, but instead use the flowers and grasses that I found in the yards and the ditches. So I got brown-eyed Susans and some poplar leaves and then some grass that I made into my own bouquets, and then taped them up wherever the bouquets were on the original wallpaper. So it's more of the plants that are native to this area and not these like peonies and roses, which are introduced species to North America. And then the brown-eyed Susans repeat throughout the show in several different locations, including the cyanotypes and the thatched wall. This house is made out of 3 granaries that have been pushed together, and the middle one, there was a root cellar underneath that is collapsed, so the siding on it really kind of like, you can see that the whole side of the building has kind of collapsed down, so the siding now kind of does this like undulating pattern that reminded me of the horizon kind of the hills around this farm. So I pulled siding off the back side of this house and stood it up to mimic the grass. So the siding now sticks 20 to 25 feet in the air, mimicking the grass kind of coming off the tops of the hills. This is Schilling's house, which is also part of the Capture Photo Fest public art, and you can be seen at large scale at Lansdowne Station. So this house here has only been empty since the early 90s. So, 30 years, 25, 30 years, and it already is starting to really fall apart, which always makes me think about kind of how people moving through a space and making sure there's, air circulating through it, but also that there's no weather getting in, really is almost like the lifeblood of the house. And when you take it away, the house quickly starts to die. So with this house, we cut off this bottom corner and brought the prairie grass through so that you can sort of, again, it's hearkening to the future when this house will be gone and the prairie will just be covering the land again. And it was kind of an adventure to cut off a lower corner and take out the load-bearing beam there in the corner, but it stayed up. For this house here, we arrived on site and the roof was full of holes and kind of caving in, and there was this beautiful grassy meadow out front of the house. So we cut the grass and made grass mats to thatch the roof with. So we cut a lot of grass and wove it there with a loom made out of sticks that we found on site and string. We wove these grass mats and then hoisted them up onto the roof, carefully not to fall through, and thatched the roof with the grass. But we thatched it backwards so that the heads were looking like they were growing up. Normally you would lay it down so the water would run down, but we wanted it to kind of have the appearance of the grass like growing on the roof of the house. And then this final house we found it had been, there had been some holes docked in the walls, and there was some nests already built in this house. But there was all these layers of wallpaper as well that were really starting to peel off, so you could see several layers of wallpaper, as well as beadboarding, like just all these sort of layers of decoration, as well as then these holes sort of punched in the walls. So I went around the farmyard and just found objects, bits of the natural world that would fit into the little holes that were in the walls. And also a few that were too large, so I built small shelves out of just the scrap wood I found lying around to put some of those natural items in the house. So for example, the bulrush, which is a really amazing plant that Indigenous people use. It's got like an aloe vera, the root is edible, the seeds make good pillow stuffing, but it also is really related to my Mennonite heritage. Mennonites are known for draining wetlands. In fact, all of Abbotsford was once a lake, and the Mennonites drained it. So our relation to these sort of wetlands as Mennonites, but also as guests here on Turtle Island, is sort of, encapsulated in just the use of this one bulrush. But yeah, there's also the barn swallow nests, and I found a piece of granite stone, which would be a glacial deposit from when the glaciers were receding across the prairies. There's caragana, which is often planted as a shelter belt around fields or around farmhouses to kind of keep the winds down. Every plant or object sort of has its own story of how it was used by people and the sort of relationship that the plants are in with the people and the animals that live there. So my ancestors are Mennonite. This show is about kind of Mennonite farmers that came to Canada in the 1870s to the prairies. They were mostly given land in the Palliser Triangle, which is some of the poorest soil in the prairies. It was very shallow topsoil there, and they farmed it and made it very rich farmland. But partially they did that not in the healthiest way for the world in general. It made the farmland better, but not necessarily. They drained a lot of wetlands, which is not great. And they also, it's not an easy time. It was a difficult sort of farmsteading time. But I think that even though that specific story I'm thinking about as I'm making the work, and I'm thinking about my grandparents, I think that anyone who has got farming in their history, which is quite a lot of Canadians can sort of relate to that kind of, there's like this weird nostalgia that we have for, you know, these olden days when we were more pioneers, but actually it was very horribly difficult, grueling time that was not very romantic. It was very dirty, it was very mean, it was very hungry. So I'm kind of playing with those two ideas that we sort of romanticize it, but actually anyone who lived through it, it was not very romantic. So I think a lot of people can relate to that, whether they know the specific history of my Mennonite ancestors or whether they just know some other farmers or have farmers in their family or whatever. I think it is specific, but also can translate.